Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today, my guests are Jack Roth and John Sumple. Before I bring them on, just a couple of announcements. You can always get new episodes free on Rokfin, Odysee, and all podcast platforms. Be sure to check out Rokfin. This is where you get all our premium content that you can't find anywhere else. And check out all the podcasts that we feature on the Forbidden Knowledge Network. You get those on our website, forbiddenknowledge.news. And definitely follow us on Facebook. Those links are all in the description. Finally, check out C60 Purple Power. You hear me talk about it almost every episode. May be possibly the most powerful antioxidant known to man. Click the link in the description. Check out what they can do for you. And you're going to get 10% off your order plus free shipping if you order anything. Today I want to welcome back to the show Jack Roth and John Sumple. They have been working in the paranormal realm together since 1997. In 2011, along with the third J, Jamie Cernoff, they founded J3 Films to create engaging, entertaining, and educational documentaries that challenge conventional wisdom. J3 Films takes audiences on an emotional journey of discovery by tapping into the innate human desire to explore the unknown, asking the question, what if this is all true? Welcome back, gentlemen. How are you doing today?
Awesome. Very good. Thanks for having us back. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you again and share more with your audience.
Yes, definitely. I'm looking forward to this. We always have a great conversation, and I watched your film earlier today. It was amazing, and it covers so many important aspects of this phenomenon, starting from ancient accounts all the way up to modern-day aspects of what some call disclosure, and the possibility of hybridization programs and other ongoing possible off-planet agendas. You had amazing accounts and information from contactees, experiencers, and whistleblowers that are really somehow at the center of it all. And we were talking about this a little bit before you come on, but how is the film doing so far?
Well, so far we released a week ago Monday, and initial feedback from our distributor is that it's been exceeding expectations. So we're really, really thrilled. As of Tuesday of this week, it went into the video on demand rental. So it is now available as a rental as well as a purchase. And we're just excited that it's accessible pretty much all over the world. Some people, if you are frustrated by it not being available on Amazon in your location, get yourself a VPN and you will be able to tap into the US audience and watch it there.
That's great. Now, I think we should start with probably from the beginning of where the documentary starts with ancient accounts, starting from cave walls to Renaissance paintings, all the way up to the point where we had paper documents. There has been obvious accounts of contact and people's sightings of what you would call UFOs in the skies. Now, what was it that really made you guys want to start with this aspect of the film?
Well, we wanted to do a brief kind of historic timeline for people to show that exactly right. These kinds of accounts, experiences have been occurring for thousands of years, literally since the beginning of human existence. And whether they are prehistoric cave dwellers who were drawing interesting things on the walls, and moving through early civilizations and early civilizations throughout the world, not just in Rome and Greece, but also South America, all over Australia, where they're drawing these interesting things that they're seeing as more primitive people that they kind of drew what they saw, especially early man. It's if they saw a bison or they saw a woolly mammoth, they drew it. If they saw a strange looking ET with a helmet on its head, they drew it. So that's what's really interesting about this. And then the written accounts start, right? So you get into like again, the early civilizations, but then the Renaissance and the Renaissance art. And what we found interesting was even early colonial America had its share of sightings and interesting things that happened in certain different colonies. And then just the way they describe these things is based on their understanding of the world at that time, which is really interesting. So we feel like it was a good way to start this, to lead people into and get them prepped, if you will, to say, okay, this has been happening for a while. What does this mean? Right? Like, what are we dealing with here? So that was actually a really fun part too, John. And I'll because we had fun with it because we both like history. And it was fun putting together, finding all that stuff. And we learned a lot as we did it, John, didn't we? I mean, it was really cool.
Yeah. And I mean, we shoehorned an awful lot of history into about 5-6 minutes. So, you can do an entire TV show, kind of like Ancient Aliens has done over the past decade or so. So there's definitely a lot to cover. But what we wanted to do in that short window of time is to make that impression that, people of a given era only knew what they knew. They had no sense of the cosmos. They had no sense of a universe. They had no sense of, what beyond what they could see with their naked eye. They had no idea how far it went and how vast it was. And if throughout their history, they saw lights in the sky and there was visitations, that was just the norm. That was what they knew. And it wasn't like all of a sudden something came out of nowhere. And most of the time we're talking about remote tribal situations or remote ethnic groups that were in a very defined area. They weren't, going around saying like, oh, that's a threat from the so-and-sos. They have, technology where they can fly in this. That didn't exist. That wasn't part of a narrative at that time. So what we were trying to impress in that opening of the film was that each one of these indigenous tribes and indigenous peoples had experiences with the sky people, and they documented what they saw. That's all they did. That's all they needed to do. Their historical record is a documentation of the experiences that they had interacting with the presence of animals and beings in their existence.
Yeah, for sure. And not only that, but, it depends on what ancient account you're looking into. It would seem that they had more of an open, regular communication with these beings. And even if you go back to something like the Sumerian mythos, there's even implications that they had possibly a hand in possibly tinkering with our DNA and creating modern humans. Would you think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my first response to that would be that, if we were to go back through anthropology, true anthropology and sociology studies, we would find out that the time era for the evolution of the different humanoid races, it's not enough time to deviate from the norm. So how is that possible that we have these 5 different classes of humanoids that really couldn't have evolved in the time frame that they've been on the planet? So where did that come from? Where was that? How was that introduced? So that's a whole another story, another movie, another rabbit hole, another can of worms, however you want to look at it. But I think it's important just for people, and this is one of the big messages that Jack and I have been sharing over the last 10 years as we've been on this journey, is what if this is all true? Instead of going to the defensive place or going to the picking on one thing and saying, I don't know about that one thing. So it's like, okay, so that one thing is bothering you, but the 50 other things that pique your curiosity are things that you're not paying attention to. What we're just trying to get people to do in making these films is to open their minds a little bit to the possibilities that this may indeed be happening. And what is, if it is indeed happening, what does that mean to us as humans historically, present day, and eventually into the future?
And you even cover this a little, accounts from even the Bible that kind of point to that man had dealings with otherworldly entities and may have even received some kind of spiritual doctrine, right?
Yeah, that's, again, when you look at the Bible and that some of the things that are not only in the Bible, but in other holy books from other religions all throughout the world. In India, you see this. Right? There's there's this sky battle in India. There's this huge battle that occurred in the sky between these gods and those gods. And it's incredible and even the way they depict it in their art. It's crazy. Like they're in these little machines and they're flying around, and it's like, whoa, this was how many how many thousand years ago. So yeah, it's that, it's hard for us. Like, John and I talk, there's two things. There's two ways to look at this. First of all, as filmmakers, totally objective, right? So we're presenting this and we don't know for sure. You can ask right now, like, do you believe in Darwin? Is it Darwinism? Is it all about Darwin, evolution of the species? I don't know enough to say no. So I've been going along with Darwinism, and I feel like, well, it's a pretty good theory. I'm not one of those people who's going to be like, no, it doesn't make any sense, but because I just don't know enough about it. But John and I talk about this a lot. Aren't we all just stardust anyway? So if you go back to the Big Bang Theory and you go back to our real origins, we're space dust. We are from the cosmos. So if you look at our DNA from that standpoint, we all are, I don't say extraterrestrial, but like we all have that DNA. We're all part of the same thing. So now the question becomes, well, do we have actual DNA from this race of ETs from planet so-and-so? Well, that's another question. But yeah, that we could have been, we don't know because we weren't there, right? But the best we can do is take all of this, the written record, the non-written record, whatever people use to communicate. Aborigines and the Native Americans, it was all verbal. Most of it was verbal. So it goes down from generation to generation where they talk about the sky people, and then they'll have drawings of that, but certainly in Rome or Greece or wherever, they had written records and they talked about this, and they talked about this during the Renaissance and during the Black Plague and all these events. So we don't know, but I think John's right. We have to be open-minded to say, yeah, the history books are always changing. History books are never etched in stone, because we learn things every 5 to 10 years where we have to change the books, and not just the history books, but the science books and the biology books and the chemistry books. Science is a fluid thing, all based on what we know at that time. So that's the real message was to show that and to present that, and then have people be in that state of mind of, whoa, this is, it's a wonderful universe out there. What is all this, and that's where we really need to be. We need to open up to that.
And one thing that I think is important to talk about too is that, the films that we've made, all three of them, they really were intended to be toward the middle of the bell curve. That's our target audience, and it's to expand the discussion into a larger group. And we have a tendency to get responses from people who have already made the decision that they're dyed-in-the-wool believers of the ufology realm, and they believe it. They're already there, and they're looking for more. They're looking for that nugget that takes the ball further down the field for them, and this is something that, when a lot of people who are so dyed-in-the-wool believers and researchers, and they watch everything, consume everything, this film really isn't for them. It's for the people who are still on the journey of discovery. And what we're trying to do with that advancement of knowledge is, for anybody who is a believer, don't look at this film and go, yeah, there's anything new in here for me. I'm a little disappointed. What I would hope you would do as a staunch believer is to say, this is a really good resource for people that I know who might be sitting on the fence. Let me take this to them, because this is going to help them better understand what I've always believed. So we see this as an opportunity for people who are looking for ways to better educate the people that they know who might not believe in the things that they believe, to help them better understand, and to even to take the film and sit down and watch it with people and say, okay, now that you've seen this, what if it is true? Even if they already believe it, just say, what if it is? And start that dialogue and see where it goes. Because we really think that, the more and more people talk about these things, and the more and more they share their own personal stories, the more we find out that this is not as much of a localized event. This is a global phenomena. It is part, and this is something that Jack and I talk about a lot, and we really want to share this. This is more about the human experience than it is about the phenomena of ufology and ETs and lights in the sky. This is happening, and if it is truly what we believe it might be, then this is affecting us in some way, shape, or form that eventually will become something that is much, much better known, whether it's through advancements of science, math, the awareness of interdimensional travel, whatever that might be. We're evolving. So it is something that we need to take off our hat, that we have the mindset of everything on earth is what we know, and this is what it is, and we're experts, and it's never going to be more than it is today. There's so much more that we don't know, and as we learn more, we have more questions, and that's what I think stimulates us as filmmakers, is that if we ask these questions and it pushes the narrative in a way that gets more information exposed and more people start talking, that's good. That's good for humanity.
Yes, for sure. Now, I want to cover one of the biggest aspects that the film covers is the possibility of ongoing hybridization programs amongst these, I guess, extraterrestrials or interdimensionals, whatever they are, and human beings. Now, as far as the information that you got in your film, was this mainly based on accounts from contactees, experiencers, and whistleblowers?
It was basically a wide range of people, but that's correct in essence. And, we had introduced the idea of hybridization, well, certainly of abduction, and then what was happening during abductions, which was experiments, and were these hybridization experiments because these little kids were showing up, hybrid kids. So we had obviously talked about that and included that in the first two films. And what we wanted to do in this one was to kind of bring that idea home and then ask the question, you're right, what is the agenda? What are the different agendas associated with these possible hybridization programs? So we spoke to obviously a lot of people. There's a lot of really great people in the film, as you know, and but yes, you have experiencers who were speaking firsthand about their experiences and what it was like and what the process was for them, and what that might be, whether it was positive, negative. Then you have certainly the whistleblowers. Well, I'll get to that in a second, but really what we talk about is the three paradigms that people believe are the three main paradigms associated with what it could be. So what if these hybridization programs exist? Why do they exist? What is the end game? And that's where we get into the second part of the film, which is, the three, we talk about the Ascension paradigm. We talk about the colonization paradigm, and we talk about the biblical paradigm. And there are other belief systems within that are a little different, but these are the three main belief systems. So these are the possibilities associated with if these hybridization programs exist.
Yeah, and the important thing there too is that all three of those believers within those paradigms all believe in the existence of lights in the sky, sentient beings controlling them, abductions, hybridization experiments, and reproductive hybrid beings. So they all believe in that. There's no argument there. You're not going to get an argument from any one of the groups on that. But where they differ is what is the intention and what is the outcome. And we thought it was really important to explore those three to give people an idea that, we could all believe in the same phenomena, but the outcome could be very different. And what resonates with you most is the one that you should do additional research on, or maybe all three of them do, or two of them do, or one of them does, or none of them, whatever. We just want people to watch this and have aha moments as they go through this. So as we've screened this film to audiences who are not necessarily dyed-in-the-wool ufology followers and believers, they're blown away by the content that's in there. They're like, there is so much in here that I've never heard about before that I absolutely need to watch it again and take notes and do research and talk to other people. When we screened it at the world premiere, we had a moderator who was a teacher of film studies at one of the local colleges in Southern California, and he entered the room to do the moderation and said, guys, I have to tell you, this is kind of like the book on how to do a documentary, because it's entertaining, it's engaging, and it's filled with content that has you asking questions. So he said, I need to watch this film more than once. I wish I had a piece of paper and a pen that I could take notes. He says, because I'm ready to go and do research right now. He says, I can't wait to get on a computer to start doing some research based on what I had seen. So that's what we get excited about when we hear that. And everyone that we've talked to at the screenings that we've had so far has had the same responses, that, wow, there's so much here to unpack. I have so much so much homework to do because there's a lot here that I wasn't aware of. And again, that's to the middle of the bell curve, which is who we were targeting. And to get that type of a response has been very rewarding for us.
Right, definitely. So now I wanted to talk about a little bit about each of the paradigms that you mentioned, starting with the Ascension and then Colonization, because these are pretty opposite. One is a lot of love and light and hope for our future, and the other one not so much. It could be pretty terrifying what could be going on with the colonization aspect, just depending on how you look at it, of course. But starting with Ascension, this is the thought that, these beings are kind of evolving our consciousness, and that's it appears to be happening to a lot of people right now, coming online and realizing a lot of things that are going on, becoming interested in spirituality, looking into the metaphysical and things that I've never seen before. So that is a very possible aspect in my mind, but the colonization could be too. But talk a little bit more about the Ascension aspect.
Well, again, we had fantastic people in the film to talk about that. And, one of the things we learned is that you're right. It's an extremely positive love and light view of this. And it's basically, it's the next step in our evolution in a positive way, that these beings, and it could be several different ET intelligences, who are guiding us and getting us to that point where we can become galactic neighbors, true galactic neighbors, right? That we're not going to blow ourselves up with nuclear bombs, but we're evolving and they're going to help us evolve. And they might even be messing with our DNA a little bit to help us evolve. And they're definitely doing experiments on us when they're doing these abductions, but it's a good thing. Even though when people first have abductions, it's a very harrowing kind of experience for most. Over time, they learn to accept it, learn to make the best of it, learn that a lot of times they agreed to be a part of that and a past life and kind of a soul kind of thing. And then, so that it's ultimately a very positive thing for everyone. That's the Ascension paradigm. But you're right. On the other side of that is a guy like Dr. Jacobs, David Jacobs, who believes in colonization. Now, he's interviewed and regressed thousands of people. And he believes in his research and the scientific method. He has a lot of evidence to suggest overwhelmingly that this is an extremely negative experience for just about everyone. And that the only conclusion that we can come to is that they are here to colonize us, that we're not going to be here. We're not going to be in control of this planet for much longer. They are here to take over. And when I say take over, we're not necessarily talking War of the Worlds. It could be something like that, but it's more a question of control and having these new hybrids be the people who are in control, where we're just kind of worker bees. Eventually they want us off this planet. The planet's important to them. We're not. So, and that's of course horrifying, absolutely horrifying. But Dr. Jacobs stands by his beliefs, and his conviction is it's incredible. And he's like, he literally said, everyone else is wrong. I'm right. I know I'm right because I've done the research. I've done decades of research and I have it here. So everyone else, they don't have the evidence I have. They don't. So it's, as audience members, when they watch this, they might be happier during the Ascension part, and they might be a little bit more freaked out during the colonization part. But it is what it is, and that's why we wanted to show both of those. And we, of course, there's a third, which we'll get to, but those two are really in direct contrast as far as positive negative is concerned.
And Richard Dolan, when we were interviewing with him, he said that the love and light it definitely is positive. the Ascension narrative is a positive event and everybody benefits from it. He said, but there's less from the work that he's done and historical research that he's done in the evaluation of some of the other researchers, Bud Hopkins and anybody who's done regression therapies, the similar information that they're sharing from their regression histories is giving us a foundation of what a lot of these people would call as evidence. And Richard said, because there's more evidence that points to the colonization narrative than there is to the Ascension narrative. The Ascension narrative is definitely much more positive, and it's something that we would all want to get behind. It can definitely cloud our judgment because that's what we would prefer. But the alternative might be something that is much, much worse. And it was interesting too, because as we talked to the individuals and we interviewed, we set up the questions in a way that we would do a little bit of we would ask the others about what these other paradigms were. And there was some contention in there. And there's a little bit of that in the film. We didn't want to turn it into any mudslinging or anything like that and have them accusing each other of false narratives and stuff like that, which they didn't do. But, Mary Rodwell, Dr. Jacobs, and Richard Dolan, well, even Timothy Alberino and L.A. Marzulli, they all were convicted in what they believed to be the truth and felt that the other ones were not right. So it's very interesting when you have that discussion with a group of very intelligent people who all believe in the same phenomena, but they do not believe that the other people are right in what they believe the end game is. That is pretty interesting. And what we would encourage is, as you watch this, which one resonates with you? And if one resonates more than the other, do that research, find out more about it, go down those rabbit holes, ask those questions, become part of communities. Because the more and more people know, the more and more questions are asked, the more and more answers we get, which only uncovers more of the truth. So that's something that I think would ultimately be beneficial for humanity, is if we kept asking questions as opposed to accepting the answers that we've been given for decades.
Yeah, I love that you had these polarizing viewpoints like, Mary Rodwell and Dr. Jacobs and L.A. Marzulli, because I do the same thing on my show, and I've had the exact same guests. I've had L.A., I've had Mary Rodwell, and, I question the same exact things, and I want to bring up these same exact topics so the audience can, look at each side and decide what they believe for themselves. So, I think that's very, very interesting. I think that's awesome that you did that. Now, as far as I want to cover one more thing about the colonization aspect, that it's possible that they've already been underway with this program for many, many years, and they already may be walking amongst us. And that's the most concerning aspect for me, really.
Yeah, that's a distinct possibility. It's what we talk about this.
We do. We do. It's the Rachel Zeiss, starts with the Rachel Zeiss story, and that continues with Jack's personal experience.
Well, they've been at this for a while. At least, again, we're assuming they've been at this for a while. And if you look at the modern era of ufology, which we think starts right after World War II, we drop the bomb, and that's the modern age of ufology begins. So when you look at that, since that time, since the 1940s, moving into the 50s and the 60s, and the abductions of people like Betty and Barney Hill, which were the first one really to come out to the public and be like, oh my God, people might be abducted by ETs. Well, what were they doing during these abductions, right? There was a purpose behind them. And it's almost as if they have been fine tuning whatever hybridization programs they've been working on. So there's a very good, and I believe that, John made a point about Rachel Zeiss. It's just a really good book written about something that happened in the 70s, where there was a hybrid named Rachel, who was an experiment, literally an experiment, where a colonel from an Air Force base became her surrogate father. I think she was part of a crash or an AT craft that had crashed, and she was in an underground base, and they raised her underground, and she was a hybrid, and they got her ready for society. So in the 1970s, they enrolled her in a community college in Northern California. And the woman who wrote the book, her daughter went to this school, this community college, and it was her roommate. And there's a lot more detail to it, but the long story short is that she was her roommate, and she wasn't ready for society. In the 1970s, she did not look totally human. She had to wear a huge scarf around her head. She wore huge wraparound sunglasses. She wore a jumpsuit. She had to have special food delivered to her. So this was like an early attempt. It's like cloning the first sheep, like, oh, what's going to happen here? Right. And it's horrible to think that because she was a person, right? And it's actually very sad, and it didn't work. And so they took her back and she disappeared, and God only knows what happened to her. But yeah, I mean, but as time has gone on, have they perfected this process? And when I say there could be various ET races doing different hybridization programs. And that's what people need to realize. There could be different ones going on. So depending on how they're doing it, what these beings are going to look like could be a little different. A lot of the women that we interviewed in the second film said, well, it's like they're very tiny, small bone structure, huge eyes shaped like almonds, green, blue, really weird. And then, they have like stringy red hair. And so they describe them this way. So they kind of look human-ish. They're kind of an odd, maybe human, but they can pass for human. And Dr. Jacobs suggests that they totally integrated already. Your neighbor could be one, you never know it. It's like Dan Aykroyd and, yeah. I mean, seriously, it's like they could be, whatever. They could just acclimate, they could fit right in. That's a horrifying concept. But I think that people need to realize that if this is true, there are most likely different hybridization programs occurring. There's more than one ET race. Because if there's one, there's got to be thousands anyway. But let's say there's 15 that are visiting our planet and doing this to us since, 40,000 years ago. So where are we with it all? Are they working together? Or do they have different agendas? And that's why, Chris, when you mentioned, it's great. You talk about the positive and the negative over here and over here. Horrifying, beautiful. Well, maybe it's a combination of all of it. Yeah. Because it's most likely a combination of several things going on, maybe several treaties, several agendas, and that the government is trying to deal with all of this in the best way they know how. It isn't very good, and this doesn't make most people happy because they keep us in the dark, and they haven't handled it well at all. But maybe in a way they have handled it well. Otherwise, we'd be all panicking. So who knows what's going on? That's why I feel anyway. But John, again, we have these great conversations about this stuff all the time.
The conversations. It's the biggest challenge in making a documentary film is you have an hour and 45 minutes to tell a story. And this one, we wanted to pack it with a lot of information that would leave people with questions and wanting to find out more. That was truly the sole intention. And again, our mantra has been, what if this is all true, through all three of the films that we've done? And we just want to encourage audiences to have that perspective and know that if you only know so much, there's much more. And this applies to history and where we are in the current day. We've talked about this. We probably talked about this with you in the last time we were on, is that, going back 10,000 years ago, they thought the world was flat until they found out that it wasn't. 500 years ago, the earth was the center of the universe until it wasn't. So there's something that we believe today to be true until we find out that it isn't. And that's going to happen forever and ever as we evolve scientifically, technology, philosophically. We ask the right questions. We find out where the veil is, and we go through it, and we just experience our existence in the cosmos in a way that maybe advanced species already are, and maybe we're just lagging behind a little bit.
Right. And I just add real quick, kicking and screaming, by the way, John, we say, right, well, we believe that the earth was flat until it wasn't. Well, guess what? We burned people at the stake for thinking it wasn't.
Right.
So when scientists came out or people came out and said, well, the earth is actually round based on my observations, death by stake, we burned them at the stake. They were witches. Right. How could they say such a thing? You think, well, actually the earth revolves around the sun and not the other way. Thank you, Copernicus, and you're dead. Right. So, I mean, literally, we're not all that, right? We talked about this. The human race has a long way to go, and we kick and scream with this stuff, but eventually we get there, even though to this day, we're dealing with flat earthers and, God bless whatever anyone wants to believe, but come on, we need to evolve a little bit.
I remember reading an article several months ago that the person who was the head of the U.S. Patent Office said that everything and this was back in the turn of the century of 1800s to 1900s, everything in the world that needs to be invented has already been invented. That was the mindset, that we are so advanced. Mm-hmm. So imagine, here we are now in 2021, looking back at 1898 going, seriously? Really? So what's it going to be like 100 years from now? If there's people here who think that this is the best that it's ever going to be and the technology is amazing, there's really not a lot left for us to learn. Wow, you're living in a bubble. There's so much more that we will learn as a result of some of the information that is now being shared, which is part of what we discuss in the third act of the film.
Oh yeah, I'm constantly blown away at how little I know after everything I learned.
Well, it's great that you acknowledge that, because you are somebody who has been exposed to so much information based on the guests that you've had, who have probably spurred you to do a tremendous amount of additional research than what you already know. And at the end of the day, when you're done you're never done going down the rabbit hole, but when you finish that session, you're kind of like, wow, I have more questions now than I did when I went in.
For sure.
And that's humanity's, that's the evolution of the species, that every time we learn something new, it's the volume of questions is significantly more.
Yes. And I have hope that a lot of people are going through this right now and becoming more open and interested in not only these topics, but a lot of important things that haven't been looked at in years. So I'm hoping humanity's kind of shifting towards that direction. Now let's talk about this third aspect, the biblical. And this has many aspects within it. People often say, angels or demons or aliens, or is it all the same thing? And, the question of, is what we're going through on a grand scale right now somehow also on a biblical scale? Does it somehow relate to the book of Revelations and the things that were prophesized? And there's just all kinds of aspects to the biblical aspect of aliens or angels or demons, or all the same thing, right?
Well, let me tee it up here, Jack, and you can take it from here. The one thing that we talked with both Timothy and L.A. Marzulli in the film was the question, and it's not in the film, but the essence of the question was addressed in how everything unfolded. But one of the initial questions were, well, where is God in relationship to ETs? Is ET here? Is God here? Or is God here and ET here? Is God a construct? Or the other way around, and both of them, that's the great deception, and that's what's happening, and that's where we're going. So the great deception is that God has always been up here, but when people start to believe that it's not, that is the beginning of the second coming. That is the beginning of the seating of the serpent on the throne, which causes the return of Jesus and riding on the horse from Valhalla. LA gave us a very descriptive storytelling about a dream he had in regards to that, which I will leave for him to tell for another day, because I couldn't do it justice. But it's very, very apparent to him and believers of the biblical narrative. And by the way, these people are not necessarily religious, but they believe that the biblical narrative is 100% right 100% of the time.
Right.
For sure.
Yeah, the Bible is right 100% of the time. Now, understand that this is just one narrative, and also understand that these people are coming at this with, it's the Bible's always been interpreted a million ways. And I would say that for any religious scripture, we're just interpreting it. That's the best we can do. It was written a very long time ago. So what they're doing is interpreting it based not only on their indoctrination from childhood, whether that is a Christian or whatever it might be. Obviously, if it's the Bible, it's in this case, it's Christian or Judeo-Christian. And it's the idea of, well, what is Ezekiel really describing here? Right? Well, the wheel in this burnt on fire in the sky. Well, that's a UFO, right? And fallen angel. Oh my God, that's the alien grays. So, and then they come to the conclusion that it makes sense if you put all the pieces of the puzzle in there that way, that it's going to come out as, yes, this is the great deception. And it's only the second coming of Christ that's going to save us from this great deception. It's negative in the same way. Well, it's negative for the most part because it's scary. They're basically saying demons are ETs. And I don't know if it, in an interchangeable way, right? So it's negative, it's evil. So that's evil. And they're interpreting it that way. In the same way, Dr. Jacobs is saying it's negative. He's saying it from a much more scientific standpoint of this is the ET agenda. They're here to colonize. They're looking at it as this is horrible and negative, and it's because this is the great deception in the Bible, right? But their silver lining is the second coming of Jesus. So that's a tough paradigm, but we wanted to include it. And one of the things we wound up being really happy about is the way that both Timothy and LA approached it in the film, and the things they told us. They were so convicted, and they, in many ways, I think, thought about what they were going to say, listen, I thought Timothy did a phenomenal job of explaining exactly why they believe this, why the biblical narrative is what it is. And it comes across as something that people are going to want to read the Bible after that. Right. Let them read the Bible. I think everyone should read the Bible. I have not read the Bible yet, so I'm guilty of that. But there's a part of me that's like, well, maybe I should read the Bible with those set of eyes. As someone who does believe in ET interaction, and then look at it that way and say, whoa, what is the Holy Ghost? What is that really? And just look at it in that way. But again, we're talking about interpretation. And at the end of the day, there's three main ones, and then we're just presenting it. But I was worried about this narrative, putting it in the film. And John was like, no, we got to put it in because this is one of the main narratives. It is what it is. Yeah. And when we started to talk to LA and Timothy, I realized these guys, for whatever they believe, I might not believe what they believe, but they are well researched. They're very convicted. They do their work. They really do. And they put a lot of work into what they do. Again, with all of this, we all have bias, no matter, we're all coming at everything with a bit of bias, some more than others, but that's why we're presenting all three, because it's like, well, they think, okay, well, and then people in the audience are going to be like, well, I kind of believe that, but I also believe that. I definitely don't believe that, but I kind of believe that. And then they'll go and they'll do their own research. And that's why John and I, what we tell people, ask us, well, what do you guys believe? And we try to stay away from that, but we do like to talk about it. And truthfully, I think it's a bit of all of it. I really do. I think some of the Bible you can interpret absolutely was ETs. It wasn't a wheel of fire in the sky. It was a UFO. We were being manipulated back then. There's no question about it. So part of the Bible, stuff in the Bible is the conception of Christ could be, right. I go there, but we don't know.
Yeah, but George Zervos, who's in the film, is a Greek Orthodox priest, and he's been in academia for the last 30 years, recently retired. And he says that, by the definition, Mary was an earthbound being impregnated by something from outer space, from the cosmos. He goes, that right there is a hybrid. It's like in itself, Jesus is a hybrid. If you want to take it literally, and this is coming from a religious scholar saying this. And one of the things that we were fascinated in our conversation with him is that he wasn't afraid to make those connections and those parallels. And he talks about certain things that he's researched for decades, where he doesn't bat an eye on the possibility of the ET races being part of historical the historical narrative that the Bible, he's looked at the Bible as from a historical analysis perspective, not from a faith-based perspective. He's a man of faith, but he is also on his research from a historical narrative in trying to understand what is being said. So if you talk to George for any length of time, you're going to be convinced that there are the things that were excluded from the New Testament are the things that you should be reading, because they were excluded for a reason, because they did share much more of the narrative from most likely a more accurate perspective, but they were excluded because they didn't fit the narrative that the Council of Nicaea wanted to have back in 400, or I think it was 400 or so AD.
Yes. Yeah, that's a super fascinating aspect of all this. And I'm so glad that, like I said, you included all these different paradigms of what could possibly be going on, because even a few years ago, it was, mainly strictly, you'd hear the nuts and bolts aspect that these guys were little green men flying here on tin cans across the universe. And now we're looking at, consciousness, spiritual connections, and biblical connections, and all of these concepts that wouldn't have been even thought of, I think, a few years ago. And I'm really glad that people like yourself are bringing all this stuff together, because I really think that that's what we need more of, is all these fields to come together and present information together. I think that's the only way we're going to move forward and figure out what's going on with all of this stuff. And another part of the film I want to talk about is you touch on the importance of the World War II era and afterwards, is that's really when we started seeing a lot of uptick in UFO activity, especially, coming from out of the media at least, and contactee accounts, abductee accounts, and things of that nature. At least it really started to pick up after the 1940s and beyond. And there's plenty of theories as to why. We hear about Hitler working with channelers to contact extraterrestrial species to possibly reverse engineer craft and all this other things. And then we hear about Project Paperclip, where we brought over all the Nazi scientists, integrated them into our NASA and government and all these institutions, and they basically, took over and started a secret space program, possibly. So what do you think are some of the important aspects that we should look at with that era when it comes to UFOs?
You want to start that, John?
This was one of the areas in the film, as we were going in from the pre-production side of it, is like, this is a film unto itself. This is all three of the areas that we approach in this require a lot of simplicity from the filmmaking point of view, because you can't do justice if you go down that rabbit hole. And if you go down the rabbit hole deeply in the course of a film, you will lose people. So we wanted to have more of the top line discussions about, what the possibilities were. But when we look back at it historically, this is something that comes up over and over again. You have to have the mindset. We can't use our present day mindset to do analysis based on what was happening at a given time period in the history of the earth, whether it's 10,000 years ago, 50,000 years ago, or 60 years ago. What we have to do is think about what the mindset was at that time when this hysteria broke out. And the mindset at that time was the Cold War, that this was a threat, that this was potentially the enemy having technology that we didn't have. And gosh, we cannot let the public know about this, because if they find out that our enemies are more advanced than we are, that kind of destroys the narrative of how great we are. So this is from the US perspective. So it was intended to be secret, because they didn't know all the answers at the time, nor did they want to cause any mass hysteria and panic as a result of that. So the media at that time sensationalized it to the nth degree, and until we got into like the 60s and 70s, when there was a little bit more of a calmer approach to it. But then the narrative turned into, flying saucers and little green men with laser guns, and it destroyed any credibility and ridiculed people who ever told the story. So we have to go back to the origins of why this was happening. Jack, I'll let you pick it up from there.
Yeah, no, and it's true. And a lot of it is tied to the military. So when you look at that, when you look at what happened in the 1940s, so we'll probably never know if Hitler was indeed doing those things, whether they were trying to reverse engineer craft and get an upper hand on us, whatever that might be. Some look at say there was an occult side to that too, and there's a lot there to unpack. But what we do know is that Operation Paperclip was absolutely a real thing. That's a fact. It's not a conspiracy theory. Operation Paperclip was a thing. The CIA was in charge of that, and under the auspices of Allen Dulles, and they brought over, it was the OSS that turned into the CIA. And literally before World War II even ended, when we knew we were going to win, we targeted a new enemy, and that was Stalin and the Soviet Union. Communism was now our enemy before World War II even ended. And that's when we started, with the help of the Vatican and some other very fascist leaning American industrialists, we started helping the Nazis get here. And it wasn't just for the space program. Everyone knows Werner von Braun. And the fact that there was the space program and the best scientists, they were Germans, or they're incredible scientists. But we also brought tens of thousands of just regular, card carrying Nazis over to Argentina. We helped them all get away, because communism was now our biggest threat. They were our enemy. But I think what was happening within that, and people don't realize, is you have the Cold War now really gearing up, but we also have these UFO experiences, these strange occurrences that started with Foo Fighters during the war, where all the pilots were seeing these Foo Fighters, right? These lights in the sky. And then all of a sudden there's these discs right in the sky, and there's these craft, and then Roswell happens, and then, with Kenneth Arnold and all that stuff. So there's a tie between what was happening militarily in the world and these UFO sightings. And that was always continued, because in the 60s and 70s, then you had all these whistleblowers, military guys that are coming out, Robert Salas and the like, saying, I was at this base, and I was, a nuclear missile base, and they were over our base, and they disrupted the missiles, and they made them, that didn't work. So they were keeping a close eye on our nuclear arsenal, and they were doing the same things with the Soviets. So there's a tie into all of that. So, but I think getting back to the film, what we wanted to do is, the military whistleblowers we had, it all ties together, because you have a guy like Clifford Stone saying, well, I went into the military, I was in Vietnam. And then the next thing I knew, I was involved in UFO crash retrieval. And it was partly because of some abilities that I may have had, and they knew about it, and they were monitoring me for longer than I thought they were. Like, in other words, he was in the military before he knew he was in the military. They were watching him. They watch people. And the same goes for Dan Sherman and Lynn Buchanan. These people are very gifted on a psi level. So they had this ability to communicate differently than perhaps most humans. And that's what they wanted. They wanted them to be able to communicate with these ETs. And they wanted them to be able to, with the crash retrieval. I mean, you see it in the film. Clifford was traumatized by what he experienced. And a lot of us going into it thought, oh, how cool would it have been to be Clifford Stone, to go to a crash site and see a dead ET body. But when you actually experience something like that, it's not so great.
Especially in the way that he experienced it, which was he was not prepared. He didn't know what he was going into.
Yeah, and, didn't he say his colonel was like, just go over there, check it out?
Yeah. So it's like, we can afford to lose you, type of thing.
I'm going to smoke a cigarette by the Jeep.
Right.
You go over there where the radiation is, and be traumatized for the rest of your life. Go.
Right.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
We're good.
Right. And those are such incredible stories, but such credible whistleblowers, Speaking of that, what was it that made you decide to put these specific gentlemen, Dan Sherman, Clifford Stone, Lynn Buchanan, in the movie?
Well, we reached out to people and basically asked. And I think one of the things where we've had luck in getting, I wouldn't say luck, I shouldn't say that, but the way that we approach the filmmaking process, we do our homework, we know about their stories, we know about their background. And by the time we present, the opportunity to work with us, they have seen our work in the previous films and have kind of said, okay, these guys know what they're doing. But it was more a matter of that we wanted to have a whistleblower segment in this. We could have focused just on telling the stories, but without having somebody who has been in the military, served, had these experiences, and were willing to talk about them in the way that they were, adds so much more credibility to the fact that the U.S. government, the U.S. military, was manipulating people, was using them to advance their agenda. And if you were to probably talk to all three of those, they might not see it that way. I know Dan specifically didn't feel that way. Lynn probably didn't feel that way at all either. But, as he talks during the film, he says that, if a 3-star general comes up to you and asks you to do a reading, what do you say? No. Well, that's being, you're manipulating, you're using that person, you're pressuring them to do something that is off the record for your personal benefit. So what we were hoping to do is get people who were willing to openly talk about their stories. And all three of them have written books. So it's not like, there's something that had never been discussed before, but the way that we approached it was the context in which these experiences fit in with the narrative that we were trying to establish in the film. So it worked very well together, having these three gentlemen who were involved in three very different aspects of the military, but all involved in the military doing things that they never thought that they would be doing when they were younger in first entering the military. They became pawns to an agenda.
Right, and you have to think, if the military is that serious to have these programs and they're applying these, why wouldn't it be real? Why wouldn't this phenomenon be true?
Right.
And why would they scrap the programs if it works so well? I'm sure they
Just
renamed it and
like Lynn talks about. He said 7 times during his tenure they shut him down and started it up under a new program name, gave him new credentials, go back to work. 7 times they had to shut it down. That right there says a lot about, we value you, but somebody heard about you, so we got to get rid of that and we'll do it all over again. So, but one of the biggest things I think in the final act of the film is the discussion that Nick Pope leads around the whole idea that the narrative has changed recently. And he focuses on the whole idea that words matter. And we need to listen to what is being said as much as we need to listen to what isn't being said. And he discusses that in 2014, something changed because the narrative in some of the U.S. reporting at that time was using language that led to threat. There was threatening language as to what was happening. And that is not the way we've talked about UFOs. That's the way we're talking about UAPs, because that's a new narrative, a whole different thing. That UFO stuff, forget about it. It's in the past. It makes no sense. It's all, hokey stuff and woo-woo stuff. But UAPs, this is serious business. And in the 2014 narrative is that, there's concern about what we don't know is happening in the sky, what these objects are doing. And, when the New York Times article came out and ATIP was unveiled and people started asking questions about that, the US could have very easily shut that down. They could have given a million different reasons as to what those things were and why they were in place, but they did not do that. Why? Because they want to control a new narrative.
Yes, for sure. Now, speaking of the narrative of, UFOs and what they're calling disclosure, a lot of researchers, a lot of colleagues, a lot of friends, even myself, just have had this gut feeling that during our lifetime, something big is going to happen with the extraterrestrial phenomenon or whatever this is, that people are going to know that it's a real thing, undoubtedly, that something's going to occur, and I don't think it would be disclosure from our government. Maybe something outside of their control might occur that would solidify a grand belief in this, to where the whole planet just accepts that we're not alone anymore. What do you think of the possibility of that in our lifetime?
Well, that the government would love that because it gets them off the hook. They would love to have some other narrative come down the pike that said, "Oh, the origins are here. Has nothing to do with the U.S. military." Go ahead, Jack.
Yeah, no, it would definitely let them off the hook. But they are going to continue to try to control the narrative.
Sure,
we all know that they're doing it now. They're spoon feeding little things, right? Making people real excited about that. But they, in a million years, they could never admit that they were in cahoots with ETs when they were doing these abduction experiments. They can't admit to any of that. They can't admit that they silenced, 4,763 people who saw things and were mouthing off about it. So they had to take care of them and bury them in the desert. They're never going to admit to any of that. They're not. So but you ask if it's something on outside of that. And here's the problem. And I wish I wasn't as skeptical as I am about this, but in the society we live in today, and I take the United States as a prime example, how many people even really care anymore? How many people aren't so distracted by the nonsense that we're being fed by the media and as consumers, right? We have been indoctrinated in the area of UFOs and ETs for a long time, whether it's through the media, whether it's through filmmaking, right? Entertainment, that's all propaganda, and if, someone made a great point. It said it's changed over the years. In the 70s, it was Feel Good, Close Encounters, ET, right? I was like, oh, these are cool. This is good stuff. Then all of a sudden it became War of the Worlds. They're eating us. They're taking over. Everything is fighting, attack LA, Independence Day. We're all fighting for our lives because of these ETs that look like, squid. So
Right.
what we're so indoctrinated. And also, I honestly, and this is the saddest part, and this is why we're making these films, and this is why it's so important that people really listen and open their minds to this, because we're so distracted as a society that we'd rather watch Kim Kardashian or some other stupid reality TV show, or argue over Democrat versus Republican, which is window dressing, right? Instead of really looking at what's really important. And that is, what can be more important than life on other planets, ETs who are communicating with us, not just life on other planets. And I hate that. I hate when you hear these things. NASA just came out with there's a droplet of water on Mars that might have a molecule in it. Really? Really? Think about that for a second. How ridiculous that is.
It's just like saying, Columbus discovered America. No, America was always there. He didn't discover it. It was always there. Those are the type of things where I think we are easily manipulated, and there's psychology at play with all of the things that are happening as far as narratives, and we may even be all wrong in the films that we're making, or the people who Chris, you might have been doing this for your entire life, and you might find out one day we were way off.
Yeah.
It's all, and but that's the thing that we don't know. We do not know the answers, but it is so worthy of the effort to try to find them. And if at some point, and I think Mary Rodwell mentions this in the film, I am completely okay with information that comes out that changes my viewpoint based on how it's presented and how valid it is. And if it's something that I can say, I agree with where this is going, I'll change my mind. I will change my perspective. So you can change your hypothesis based on the information that's presented. And until we get information that changes it one way or the other, we're always going to be asking the questions. Going back to the whole idea of disclosure, I think disclosure is happening. It's this slow, controlled disclosure. I think that the fact that we're talking just about UAPs, we're talking about technology and not the sentient beings behind them, that's intentional. Because once we get to the point where we can, kind of introduce this new technology as being something that we've reversed engineering, we're not focusing on where it came from. We're focusing on the technology. But then there's going to be by the way, it'll be like Jack said. People are like, oh, really? Yeah, ET. It was ET. Oh, okay, cool. Because no one's going to care. We were talking with somebody in the last several weeks. Actually, I think it was L.A. Marzulli. L.A. was on with another show that we had been on, and the question was asked, and he was like, when the New York Times article came out, he said his wife said to him, your phone is going to blow up. And he's like, I cannot believe that this is happening. He said, crickets. He said, nobody cared. He said, and we had since talked with other people who had the exact same opinion. They thought this was the game changer. This was going to change everything. Nothing happened. And the reason why? Because, the Kardashians are on at 9. I don't give a shit about that. So it's really, there is a dumbing down part of this that there's the control mechanism. It's just like, and you go back through history in any era, there's always control mechanisms at play to keep the power brokers in place. And that's no different today than it was 10,000, 50,000 years ago.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. But I do have hopes that may be slowly changing, and the old systems may be crumbling, and then they may be losing on a grand scale. But that's just me having high hopes. And
I think we all want something to come out. Mary Rodwell mentions in the film, there are people who, if a UFO landed on their front lawn, they'd say it's a fire truck because they don't want to believe. There are so many people who have that type of mindset. We've talked to people in the past who've had the mindset is like, I've really never thought about this before. This is very interesting. And when we screened this film in Pasadena, we had a lot of people coming up saying like, there's so much in here. This is over, it's like this, it's robust. There's so much information. I have to really dive into it. And a lot of that is people who have not spent a lot of time in this space. And if we can encourage more people to spend some time in this space, it's awfully lofty to say as filmmakers, we want to change the narrative of the planet. But why not throw that out there as a big agenda, big, hairy, audacious goal of ours is to say, if we can do this domino effect, this person talks to this person and they talk to 5 people and so on and so on and so on, the narrative starts to become more conscious as opposed to something that's been buried and relegated to the fringes. If we can help spark that, then that is our intention. We're not just out to make films for fun. We're not out there to, just waste our time. We're out there to do something that is engaging, entertaining, and hopefully creates awareness.
For sure. Man, that was excellent information. Jack, John, thank you so much for coming on again. We're going to have to do this again. Before you guys head out, is there anything that you're working on new that could be possibly we could look forward to in the future?
We have quite a robust development list right now. We have a couple of projects that are within the ufology world. We have a few that are outside of it. There's some long form narrative stuff that we've talked about as well. So yeah, there's a few irons in the fire. We have a couple of stories that are currently in development that could pop within the next, I would say, 6 months. There's a couple that we could go into production, tomorrow and be ready to put it into post within 2-3 weeks, because we've done all the work to kind of set it up, tee it up to go, but we just need funding's a big part of it. As anybody knows, in any project, you need funding in order to get it moving. So yeah, we do have quite a bit in the pipeline, and we're excited to do whatever percolates up to the top and sit down and talk with you about it again in a couple of years.
Great, man. And if people want to find out more about the films and any of your work, social media, anything like that, what's the best way they can do so?
The best place is to start at our website, j3films.com. There is a projects in the menu that links to all 3 of the films. And if you go to any one of those 3, you'll see where you can watch it. All of our socials are on there as well. So the best place to go is to the j3films.com website.
Sweet. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much again. Excellent information, and we will definitely be talking again sometime in the future.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us, man. It's always fun. Thanks.
Yes, definitely. And until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening. We will be talking again tomorrow. Good night.